Hi everyone, today we're going to be looking at one of the most important documents in a coder's workflow, the discharge summary. Because this document summarizes the entire hospital stay, it's our best tool for accurate coding, but it can also be the most complex to navigate. I'm going to show you today my step-by-step process for extracting the right information, clarifying ambiguities, and assigning the correct codes to ensure a high-quality clinical record. Let's get right into it. Discharge summaries can arrive in a variety of different formats. However, the most common you're going to see is like what we have in our example today. This discharge summary contains all the relevant information needed, nicely sorted under headers, making it very easy for you to pull out any relevant info needing to be captured. Now let's start at the top. First, we want to check our patient's age, as well as the specialty they were admitted under. This sets your clinical frame of mind. For example, a patient in the cardiology ward with chest pain is going to be coded very differently than a patient in orthopedics with the exact same symptom. Next, we want to double check our date of admission, as well as our discharge date. This defines the length of stay that we'll be coding for. Another piece of information relevant to capture is our admission method. We can see that our patient was admitted by waitlist, therefore it was a non-urgent admission. So we will add our relevant code for it and ensure that the date reflects the correct date. We can see that our discharge date is the 3rd, therefore we're going to ensure that our discharge summary as well as our discharge from hospital code reflect that correct date. From here, we are happy with all the info, so we are going to approve our annotations there. Next step is going to be identifying the principal diagnosis. Now, usually this will sit under a section called Final Diagnosis or Reason for Admission or Discharge Summary, like you can see here. This is the condition established after study to chiefly responsible for the patient's admission. Now, the golden rule here is not to just code the first thing that you see. You need to scan the hospital course or the whole letter sections to see if the initial query diagnosis was indeed confirmed or if a more specific condition was found during the stay. We can see with our example letter here that our primary diagnosis sits with acute appendicitis with a secondary diagnosis of essential hypertension. Now, this looks like it's going to be the topic of our letter. However, we do need to continue to read through the rest of the hospital course in order to confirm that. So we'll keep it in the back of our mind for the time being and scroll down through the rest of our letter. Now, this is essentially a narrative section of the letter. As a coder, you're playing a detective and you're wanting to look for comorbidities. So did the patient have any pre-existing conditions like diabetes or hypertension that were managed during the stay? Any complications? So did something happen during the stay, like a post-operative infection or an adverse reaction to a medication? Now, make note that we also only code these if they are required in clinical evaluation, therapeutic treatment, or increased nursing care. So kind of the golden rule here is if it's not treated, don't capture it. So reading through our example letter here, we can see that this patient came to the ER with periumbilical pain accompanied by nausea. The A&E did an abdominal ultrasound that confirmed this acute appendicitis. They were then taken to the OR on the 2nd for a laparoscopic appendectomy, which was uncomplicated, which is good, no complications, non-perforated, and the appendix is fully removed. However, upon admission, the patient's blood pressure was quite elevated, which they initially attributed to that surgical stress. However, the BP remained consistently high post-operatively despite the kind of support that they gave. Now, from our diagnostics section, we know that this patient has essential hypertension already exacerbated by illness. So what we can actually do in our letter here is pull that existing hypertension code from the patient's record and link directly to it to just say it's another review and treatment of this ongoing issue. Now here, because we had our primary diagnosis as acute appendicitis and in the actual clinical summary, they've confirmed that diagnosis, we're going to capture it as a new diagnosis. We will also capture our laparoscopic appendectomy, as this was a procedure that was completed within the visit. Now we can see our AI has picked it up already. That's great. We're going to change the date to the correct date and create this code as not a problem. And then from here, I'm just going to approve our code as well. Now with procedures, we want to be as specific as possible. Don't just code surgery and add the text for what the surgery was. Look for the specific approach. Was it laparoscopic? Was it open? You can get your codes to be as specific as outlined here. So we can see our laparoscopic appendectomy, we have the exact code that goes right down to that detail. Now check for extra things as well. Don't forget to look for significant non-surgical procedures like blood transfusions, biopsies, or any high-level imaging that might impact the diagnosis-related group or funding for this patient. Finally, we want to look at any discharge medications. This is a great safety net for your coding. If you see the patient was started on a new course of antibiotics or insulin or anything else, but you haven't coded an infection or diabetes, you will need to go back and find the clinical documentation to support those codes. Now we can see here, we've got no relevant medication mentioned in the section here. However, we do see in our letter here that the patient's home medication was resumed and titrated from 10 milligrams to 20. Therefore, we're going to capture this medication like we can see the AI has picked up already and simply capture it as a changed dosage. We'll also capture our blood pressure, the last one that was calculated at the end here, which the AI has already picked up for us. Now we've got our plans to follow up post-visit in 6 weeks. We'll capture that as a note. That is great to have, as well as our weight and our height, which our AI has perfectly picked up for us. Now we kind of want to do the final validation skim. So we want to make sure as we go through that we haven't missed anything in these last sections here. So we can see we've got that telephone click, which we've captured already, as well as our medication change. And here we can see we've got an allergy for penicillin. Now what I'm going to do is check to see if that allergy is captured in this patient's history already, which we can see it has been. If that code wasn't in the patient's history, I would add a code to capture this allergy to be added to the patient's record. However, it already sits in there, so we'll leave it as is. Now we keep scrolling through here. This is just kind of the last admin info. Nothing else is needed to be done here. So now we're finally done with our letter. Now, before you hit submit, ask yourself, does this code string accurately reflect the severity of the patient's illness? If the documentation is unclear or conflicting, this is the point where you could either send a physician query for clarification or ask a member of our team. Accurate coding isn't just about speed, it's about clinical integrity and the safety of the patient. The last thing we are going to do with our letter is just double check if any tasks need to be sent. Now we do have our change for our medication, therefore I'm going to approve this task that our software has generated for the meds team to review that medication and add that medication change to the patient's record. Now we don't see any other tasks needing to go to the GP or anything like that. So at this point, I'm happy to press our finish review in the bottom corner and completely send off that letter. So there you have it. We hope this video gave you a solid grasp on how to code a discharge summary. We use the BetterLetter platform today to walk you through this coding process. So if you're curious to learn more about the platform, just drop us an email at hello@betterletter.ai. We'd love to chat more about the platform. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.